So welcome, everyone. So I'm wearing multiple hats, as I mentioned. I am on the board of CPHR Alberta, but I'm here today to talk to you on behalf of looking at the topic of building a high engagement workforce. And I have my own company. My company name is Engaging Workplaces, and I just kind of want to tell you a little bit about where that comes from. I actually have been working in the field of helping organizations to maximize their people for many, many years, over 25 years. And I became fascinated with employee engagement a number of years ago. I would get called into organizations and they would say, "Claudia, help me. We're having problems. You know, we've got these people, they don't seem to be all that invested in work. We've done surveys, they don't seem to be happy here. We're losing people. And frankly, some of the people that we still have here with our organization, we wish we would lose." So I became really interested in how can we make workplaces better? How can we make them productive and also places people want to come to work? So that's why I created my company name as Engaging Workplaces to reflect that. So I'm going to tell you my bias right up front and why I'm so passionate about all this. I truly believe that your most important asset leaves at the end of the day. Anybody here with me? Yeah. So, you know, we have capital, we have equipment, we have technology, you know, we have all kinds of resources. But, you know, over the years, many of those things have been equalized. But, you know, it's the people in our business who can really make a difference to our success or failure. You know, when I was speaking with some of the people at Talent Pool before this session, I was talking about how I've seen organizations do things like merge, go through major changes, try business transformation, you name it, major changes. And when you look at the research on what happens with a lot of these changes, a lot of them fail to realize the promises that they initially had. You know, you think everything's going to be better, you think that this is really going to make a difference, but the reality is, if you're not bringing your people along with all of those things, even your best initiatives will fail. Your best technology will not work. So, by the way, this is going to be an interactive session. I'm going to be asking you to have some conversations at your tables. I'm going to ask you to think about your own organizations and your own situations as we go through this presentation. Has anyone ever experienced that, where, you know, you think you've got a really good idea, you're introducing something brand new, and it just doesn't go over as well as you hoped, and you do realize in hindsight that it had something to do with the people? Yeah? Okay. So, what we're going to talk about this morning, I'm going to talk about engagement, but I'm actually going to talk about 3 other pieces of information that we can look at to begin to get a handle on it. When it comes to employee engagement, just kind of giving you a little bit of heads up on where we're going, we need to figure out what actually keeps people with our organization. And not only keeps them physically, but keeps them psychologically. Have any of you ever experienced the situation where you've got someone who is staying with your organization, but psychologically they quit a long time ago? So we need to figure out how to get people to be their best. So we can look at 3 different pieces of information. So one of those pieces of information we can look at is, why do people leave? It's really fascinating to me in the work that I've done, and I'll share this with you in a couple of minutes, but people will say they're leaving for one reason, very typically. And I got to tell you, the reason they usually give you is not the real reason that they're leaving. So we'll explore that. We're also going to talk a little bit about retention. So why do people actually decide to stay with organizations? You know, and what does the research show us about that? What do we know about that? And finally, we're going to look into engagement. We're going to spend the bulk of our conversation talking about engagement. And how do we get people to want to stay, to feel a sense of commitment and dedication to the place that they work, that they want to do their best. You know, what's the formula? What are some of the things we can look at that are going to help us do that? So right away, I'm going to give you a chance to start thinking about this for your own perspective, or from your own perspective. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, if you haven't already, to the people at your table, and I want you to take a couple of minutes and talk about this. Who's ever left a job? I've left lots. I want you to have a conversation, though, about what were the main reasons that you left a job. And just have that conversation for about 5 minutes at your table group, and let's see what you come up with. Okay, I think you've had a chance to talk about that. So, could I ask for some volunteers? Would anybody be willing to share why they've left a job? No volunteers? Thank you.
So it's been 10 or 12 years. Of course, there's when you actually leave the job, in my case, it was like when I checked out. Mm-hmm. And I checked out on the day when a project that I'd worked on with in the organization that had been successful in funding was then advanced without any discussion with me and my role having shaped that project. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's other factors in all of that, but that was the day it was like, no, I think we're done here. Right, right. Yeah, so not getting the recognition for the hard work you'd put in, and... Well, it was really about the forward consideration. The forward consideration. Okay, we've got this now. Let me know how I'm included in this going forward. Right, so no thought to how you're going to be included moving forward. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? I'll share, oh, yes.
My legs are short. Okay, our table was sharing that they left their jobs from boredom and from toxic environments.
Mm-hmm, yeah, thank you. Yeah, anybody else relate to some of that? Lack of opportunity, boredom, toxic environments. So, you know, it's really interesting. One of the things, you know, I've been working in HR consulting for many, many years. So I've done exit interviews for organizations. So here's what I've heard. I go to organizations and I say, so why are your people leaving? Oh, well, they're getting more money somewhere else. Has anyone ever heard that in an exit interview? Is it true? Sometimes, yes. But what's interesting is money is an easy answer. You know, the way a lot of organizations do exit interviews, it's, you know, I have just resigned and I get to meet with my boss to do my exit interview. And what the boss doesn't know is you're the reason I'm leaving. And so what do I tell the boss in my exit interview? Oh, I'm getting more money, and that's why I'm leaving. So it's a really easy answer. And it's a way of saving face. It's a way of, you know, just think when you're leaving an organization, you might need them for references in the future. You want to manage the reputation. You don't want to burn any bridges. So quite often people will say they're leaving for the money. But the reality is, money may be a consideration, but let me ask you, have you ever stayed in a job where you make less money than you could somewhere else because you love where you are. What I heard, I remember years ago, I did about 200 exit interviews for a large organization over the course of a year. And they asked me, you know, why are these people leaving? They're telling us they're leaving for the money. And as I talked to them, money really wasn't the main, I mean, it was bonus. They were getting more money in some cases. But what was happening, they were telling me they had toxic work environments. You know, I'm just, my teammates don't get along. It's an unhealthy environment. And so that would be a reason. Another reason they were leaving, they'd say, my boss. You know, my boss is a jerk. You'll see this later on in my presentation. But, you know, there's an old saying in human resources, and you'll see it all over LinkedIn periodically. People don't leave organizations, they leave bosses. I used to work for KPMG. I left when they changed my boss. And I got a new boss, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Anyways, so a lot of different reasons that people leave. One of the interesting ones, and again, this is food for thought. I'm going to give you some little tips and ideas as we go through this presentation. But one of the reasons that was an undercurrent of why many people finally decided to make the decision to leave that organization, they said there were performance issues on the team and no one was dealing with them. Have you ever been frustrated because you're working really hard and you see somebody who's not pulling their weight? So it's amazing how toxic that can be. So one of the things, you know, I've got a little tip for you here. If you aren't doing them, do exit interviews. Talk to people and find out why they're really leaving the organization. But here's the catch. Try to get someone who's viewed as impartial, objective, and that they will protect the confidentiality of the individuals that they're talking to. You're going to get more honest information if the person doing the interview is seen that way. So sometimes if you don't have someone in your organization who can do that, you might just need to get some outside help. Maybe it's your human resources if they have the credibility. So, food for thought. So why do people, we know a little bit about why people leave. Let's take a look at why people stay. So over the years, I've kind of been collecting information, looking at research on why do people stay with organizations. And here's the common threads that I've discovered, and I'm curious to see if these are your experiences as well. They want interesting, challenging, and meaningful work. Boredom, I heard at this table, is one of the reasons for leaving. People want to feel like their work makes a difference. Is that true for you guys here in the room? You know, they want to feel like their work has a purpose. Another factor, having the opportunity to develop in their career, grow, learn in many different ways, to not feel stagnant in what they're doing. That helps people stay. Strong leadership and communication. And I can't underemphasize this one. You know, leaders who communicate the vision of the organization, leaders who talk about here's where we're going, here's how you fit in, and they give people a sense of purpose. They give them a direction. They give them information about what's happening. When I worked at KPMG, I worked for them for 14 years. And through the years, we went through merger after merger. Back around when I was working with them, that was the nature of the big advisory firms. They were merging. And I remember the best merger that we ever had. I got a note from our CEO, everybody did, we got an email. And the CEO said, as you know, we're in discussions with X company about the possibility of a merger. I want to let you know that I know nothing about where we are in that process right now. So he communicated to us that he knew nothing. It was all with the lawyers at the time. And so he was waiting for the lawyers to get back to him. But I thought that was one of the best managed changes that I experienced, because rather than us filling in the blanks and assuming that no news meant something bad was going on, he just, you know, he quelled the rumor mill right away by saying, I don't know anything, so just letting you know. So great leadership communication, so critical. A great work environment, you know, do I like the people whom I work with? Recognition and rewards, and this isn't about, you know, you get a cake for your birthday. Well, that's wonderful, but it's more than that. Recognition. You know, when you look at how do people want to be recognized? There are two main ways people want to be recognized. They're number two choices. Number one is a sincere, heartfelt thank you from the boss. The second is a sincere, heartfelt thank you from a colleague. So, you know, all the little swag and stuff, it's nice to have, but it's amazing how positive feedback can make a tremendous difference. Work-life balance. Has anybody here ever, you know, left a job for work-life balance? I have, you know, and more people are looking for work-life balance. When you look at the retention research, what's really interesting is money is on the list. You know, I sometimes ask the question, if you won Lotto 649, you got 60 million or some ridiculous number, would you still go to work on Monday? Money matters, doesn't it? But it's interesting, the retention research suggests money is not a number one motivator for people. But it becomes an issue when we don't feel like it's fair and equitable. And what that means is when I'm comparing myself to my colleagues, do I feel like I'm being paid fairly? You know, somebody else is doing the same work as me. Are they making $20,000 a year more? And why is that? So those kind of comparisons happen. And we also look outside, you know, what are, in our industry, in our sector, are we being paid fair and equitably? So it doesn't tend to be in the top 3 or sometimes even 5 list of what keeps people in the job, but it certainly can be a dissatisfier when it's not right. And then finally, flexible work arrangements and benefits make a big difference. Are any of you familiar with the Virgin group of companies, you know, Richard Branson's babies? They have a really neat holiday policy that they announced a couple of years ago. What they said is, we are abolishing your weeks of holiday. Instead, you can take as many holidays as you want. The caveat being, as long as your work is done or your work is covered. And it's been working out great for them. So does that sound really radical? Who's thinking that'll never work in my environment? It may not. What's interesting, though, I recently met a lady. She's in the oil and gas industry in Calgary, and she was telling us, myself and a group of people, about her company. And they have this policy. And what was really fascinating to me, and this is food for thought, they say their people must take a minimum of 3 weeks vacation a year. Isn't that radical? How many of your organizations, I used to work for a nonprofit, Winifred Stewart Association, wonderful organization. But you know, we were very conscious that if people aren't taking their vacation, you're building up a liability there, right? It's a problem, and you're potentially burning out people to boot. So what a neat concept to say people must take their vacation, and they must take a minimum. But this oil and gas company actually said, and you can take as much vacation as you want, as long as the work is done or your work is covered. And they've been doing it for quite a few years and have never had an issue. It's amazing what happens when you treat people like grown-ups. So those are some of the, do those fit with some of the reasons you've stayed in jobs? Yeah. So now retention, I've got another tip for you here. Your goal in retention is not 100% retention. some people need to leave. Some people will be leaving because they have a change in their life situations. Some people may need to leave because they're going to get different opportunities than what you can offer, or different experience, or maybe an opportunity for career progression. And you know what? That's a good thing. And then there are some people who simply aren't a fit for your organization, don't fit the culture, can't do the job, won't do the job. And hard decisions to make sometimes, but I'm a big believer that you're better off helping those people to respectfully move on than to keep them in the organization. So let's talk about employee engagement. So what the heck is employee engagement? You've probably all heard the term, and there are many, many definitions of it. I happen to like this one from an organization called Psychometrics Canada, but they talk about employee engagement as the connection people feel to their work that results in higher levels of performance, commitment, and loyalty. So one of the things we often talk about when we have a person who's highly engaged, they give discretionary effort, so that you often hear that term used with employee engagement. So what does that mean? So imagine it's Friday night, 4:30, it's quitting time. And your person is getting ready to leave the office, getting ready to leave their workstation. And as they're putting on their coat, they see the phone light up, and they look, and it's a customer or client on the other end of the line. So discretionary effort, one of the ways we can see it is one person might say, nuts to this, I've had a bad week, I hate this place anyway, I'm going home. I'm not going to answer that phone call. The engaged employee might say, you know what, I want to help this person. I'm going to pick up the phone and take this call. It'll be 5 minutes out of my life. Not a big deal. So that's discretionary effort. So the nice thing about engagement, any of you ever have trouble attracting people to your organization? Hiring the right person? Sometimes? It can be hard. Your engaged employees are fabulous ambassadors. You know, one of the things, they're so excited, they're so happy to work where they are. I mean, they recognize no job is perfect, no organization is perfect, but they feel really good, and they talk up your organization. So they tell other potential employees about you, they tell customers, they tell family, and they spread goodwill for you. So, very powerful. So I want to give you a chance to think about, we're going to explore this. So what causes a person to want to do that? Give discretionary effort and be their best, feel that sense of loyalty and commitment. So take a couple minutes again at your table and have a conversation about what helps you, what makes you want to go the extra mile. What are your factors? Can I get you to shout out some of the reasons that you do your best work? So good boss? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or colleague?
And third one is the purpose of your work.
The purpose of your work, yeah. So the boss, the colleagues, the purpose of your work, yeah. Any others?
For me, it's the people we serve. So we serve a large group of seniors, so just making sure that they have the resources they need and the opportunities that they'd like to pursue.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, so there's many reasons that we might be engaged in our organizations, and it can be very personal. But again, the research suggests that there's some commonalities. What's really interesting is, you know, have you ever gone the extra mile for your own career? You know, I know that I know where I want to eventually be, and I know that this is what's going to get me there. It may be the people that we serve, our customers or our clients. very important to me, my sense of purpose. So many of those things can contribute. But even those things in an unhealthy environment might be hard to sustain. So one of the organizations that's done a tremendous amount of research into what contributes to engagement is the Gallup organization. Is anyone familiar here with the Gallup Q12? Yeah, wonderful resource, isn't it? The Gallup Q12, as it says up there, this is how they describe it. 12 key expectations that employees have regarding work that, when satisfied, correlate with strong feelings of engagement. So, you know, people, when I think about engagement, I think about the difference between commitment and compliance. You know, when somebody is engaged, they will do things because they are committed, and in other cases, they may just be complying, which doesn't tend to take you quite as far. So just to tell you a little bit about Gallup, they've been doing their employee engagement survey since the late 1990s. They run it every 2 to 3, or is it 3 to 4? Anyways, every few years. So the most recent one that I've seen was released in 2013. I just got an email last week that Gallup is on the verge of releasing their latest survey. So I'm not sure what those results look like yet. But Gallup, in the 2013 survey, they talked about they've surveyed 25 million employees through 189 countries, 69 languages. And they have looked at engagement worldwide. They can also identify engagement by region and by country. So amazing resource in terms of what's happening out there in the world of work. So Gallup's Q12, if you can Google Gallup Q12 and you'll actually find a list of their 12 questions. But what's really interesting is they take a look at the employee's experience through their life with the organization, and their 12 expectations align around those. So just to give you a few examples, you know, the first 3 questions they actually have on their list is, you know, what do people need as a basic requirement to do their job? Imagine someone who's new to an organization. So there's questions like, do you know what is expected of you at work? You would be surprised how many times I run into people who say, I really don't know what they expect. So I won't read all the questions, but I'll just give you some samples. They also have another segment of questions that talk about a person's contribution and the value they create, you know, the value that they have to the organization. So how about this one? Does your supervisor or someone work seem to care about you as a person? The human touch makes a difference. Another set of questions help answer the question of, do I belong to this organization? You know, that sense of purpose. Does the mission purpose of your company make you feel like your job is important? That's one of the questions. And then they also have questions around learning and growth. In the last 6 months, has someone at work talked to you about your progress? So it's really interesting. So it gives us some clues of how do we move beyond compliance and get commitment. And at an organizational level where the person is saying, you know, I'm doing it for me, but I'm also doing it because the organization supports me to do these things right. So why do we, what are the benefits of employee engagement? They're massive, and I mean, here's just a few. Higher productivity, profitability, lower turnover, lower absenteeism. Engaged employees are healthier, both mentally and physically. Better quality work. You have less defect, less theft. You know, when school starts in September, any of you ever see your paper stocks go down? You know, that can be a sign of a disengaged employee. You know, they're not treating me right, so I'll take a few pens, I'll take some pads of paper. These things happen. Higher customer satisfaction. If your employees are engaged, your customers are more likely to be happy as well. So, Better communication, you know, amongst the team, across the organization, healthier employees, as I mentioned. Employees are just more positive about the organization. Here's what Gallup has found. You know, when they study these organizations, they found that the organizations with the top 25 Q12 stores, their top 25 organizations, they're 50% more likely to have lower turnover, 56% more likely to have high customer loyalty, 38% more likely to have above average productivity, and 27% more likely to report higher profitability. And I know some of you are in the not-for-profit, but some of those measures are really important, aren't they? Productivity and those kinds of things. So let's take a look at what's happening in Canada. There's, you know, we talk about, when it comes to employee engagement, there are basically three categories of employees. I'm going to give you Gallup's description of the three categories. So we have engaged employees. Boy, do we want those employees. Engaged employees, according to Gallup, work with passion and feel a profound connection to their company. They drive innovation and move the organization forward. Nice to have those people in your midst, isn't it? We have not engaged, so they're not actually disengaged. And in fact, it has been my experience, I'll read you Gallup's description in a minute, but not engaged employees, you can't always tell. Because for a variety of other reasons, perhaps they care about their clients or their customer, they care about their colleagues, so they're not as checked into the organizations as they might be, but they care enough still that on the surface, on a good day, you'll see them still, you know, really breaking a sweat, doing their best work for you. But they're doing it for different reasons, and it may come and go, so they may have bad days. Here's how Gallup describes these employees. Not engaged employees are essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through their workday, putting time but not energy or passion into their work. So I don't think it's quite as dramatic as that personally, but it can be. So we have a third category, actively disengaged. I have worked with these people. Actively disengaged employees aren't just unhappy at work, they're busy acting out their unhappiness. Every day, these workers undermine what their engaged coworkers accomplish. Do you know any people like that? They're toxic to your work group. Remember when I said before, deal with performance issues? You may think you're doing people a favor, you know, you're not. So let's take a look at what's happening in Canada. This is according to the State of the Global Workplace survey in 2013. So as I said, new survey coming out. It'll be interesting to see the numbers. So you're ready to see how many are engaged here in Canada? What's your guess? 25? I feel like an auctioneer. 25. Do I hear 30, 30, 35? Okay. Shocking. Isn't that shocking? Yeah, so the question was, is there data on non-profit? And I believe it is a mix, and I believe you can find that information as well. And Gallup isn't the only one who does a survey, by the way. Psychometrics Canada did a survey. There's many, many organizations, so I'm pretty sure that there's data out there. So 70% sit in that middle category where they say, I don't know, am I having a good day or a bad day? And then finally, 14% of the Canadian workforce has been found to be actively disengaged. They're toxic, they're spreading poison. We need to deal with these people. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about having conversations with them as a starting point and saying, are you happy? Do we have you in the right job? Maybe they're a very good person in the wrong position. Or they're a very good person who doesn't happen to align with our culture. So we need to have respectful conversations, but we need to do something about these people. It's estimated, and again, these are US dollars, that disengagement costs between $450 to $550 billion annually in organizations. So another tip I have for you is conduct stay conversations. If you're not already doing that, if you're a leader in an organization, if you're HR, if you work with other people, have chats with them. Ask them questions like, what keeps you here? What do we do that supports you in doing your best work? What do we do that hinders you in doing your best work? How am I doing as your leader? I love it when leaders ask these questions. As your leader, what can I do more of, less of, or differently to make your work life better and your work easier so that you can do the best job that you want to do? Powerful, right? So, have these conversations and don't make it a once annual at the performance review. Make these ongoing conversations. So let's take a look at the costs of all this stuff. I'm actually going to get you doing some calculations because we don't talk about this enough. Engagement, lost engagement, turnover costs organizations money. So when we look at turnover, it's estimated that turnover costs are anywhere from 70% to 200% of the person's annual salary. So in other words, if I've got an employee who makes $40,000 a year, it might cost me $80,000 by the time I replace them, run the ads, do the interviewing, pay for training, the wear and tear on the other people around who are carrying an extra load. So these are, some of the estimates that are out there. So I'm going to turn this over to you at your tables, and just individually, here's a little formula you can use to start thinking about what does turnover actually cost us. So how many employees have left in one average calendar year? We have some really good years, some really bad years. Think about how many do I lose in an average year. What's their median salary? And so that's the midpoint on your salary range. So multiply that and use 70% or 0.7 just to get a bit of an idea. So let you think about that at your own tables. Do a guesstimate if you don't know how many employees have left. Just see if you can get a bit of a sense of what this is costing you. So anyone get any interesting numbers? It's worth it to take this back to your workplace and think about this. This lady at the front table, she said, when I have turnover, I actually save money. And she says she's able to hire someone new at a lower rate. And, for a while, they're able to function without that person, and so there's money saved there. Anybody else have that experience? What's interesting is the research actually suggests, and experience suggests, that when we hire a new employee, they often ask more than the person leaving. So, depends. I mean, some long tenure employees, their salary ranges will go up. Yeah? Yeah, so they leave the program, but they stay with the agency. Yeah, then you don't have a cost. Well, you will have a cost because you still have to recruit someone for what you've lost. But at least it's a saving to the organization because you're able to utilize that talent still. Yeah. So, the thing to think about, it may not look like it's costing you, but wear and tear, how long do people do double duty? Are there lost opportunities because you just don't have the people in place? So there's other hidden costs. So this is just meant to give you a bit of a look at what does it actually cost me. Heaven help you if you're trying to, you've got a vice president or a very senior position that you're trying to replace. That's where the costs get up into 200%. Anybody here ever deal with a search firm? It's not cheap, that's for sure. And for good reason, because especially those senior positions, you want the right person. So let's look at the cost of disengagement. Again, according to Gallup's research, they estimate that for every $10,000 of salary you pay, engagement costs you $3,000. And again, it's a lot of these hidden costs. You know, it's losing customers. It's the effect that sometimes good people will leave the organization because of the disengaged employee. You know, that will be a contributing factor. So what does that cost you? So those are some of the kinds of costs that are embedded. So again, I have a little formula, and this one can be interesting to look at. So think about it. How many employees do I have? I've got 100 employees, say. 14% of those, according to Gallup's research, might be actively disengaged. So that's, that's 14 actively disengaged people. Then think about your median salary and multiply that by 30%, which is that calculation of $3,000 for every $10,000 paid in salary. And then, okay, here's where it gets complicated a little bit. So your cost of disengagement for employee, which is the second one, times your number of actively disengaged employees, they give you an estimated tangible cost of disengagement. So I'm not going to get you doing this. I believe you have access to my PowerPoint after, but I would suggest you do this. The numbers can be staggering. So why do we need these numbers? Because if we're going to change something, there may be a cost involved, and we're going to have to figure out how to talk about that. Staff morale, yeah. Customer dissatisfaction. How about, I'm sorry? Attracting new talent, yeah, you bet. Organizations have a reputation. You know, in your sector, could we name 3 organizations and an image would come up in terms of how they are as an employer? So if you're losing people or your people are disengaged, that's going to get out there. So there's a lot of tangible as well as intangible costs to disengagement. Rework, you know, they didn't do it right the first time, we've got to pay for them to do it again. So there's a lot of costs involved. Sick days. And sick days from the people who've been dealing with the disengaged employee and are just fed up. So how do we tackle this and build a high engagement workplace? So here's a few steps that I think are critical. And depending on your role in the organization, there may be some variability in how you do this. But it's a good starting point to figure out where are we? What is our level of engagement? So I would suggest doing things like, you know, maybe a simple survey, do your exit interviews, and maybe talk to, you know, if you didn't do exit interviews on people who left in the last year, call them up and say, why did you leave? What could we have done better to keep you? Conduct those stay conversations, maybe have focus groups. Try to figure out what's going on in our organization. You know, you could use a survey of some kind. You need to build a business case because, you know, if you are not the CEO, you're going to have to figure out how do I get the CEO or our executive director or what have you to buy into the idea that we've got to do something about this. You also need to think about, and I've touched on this when I talked about Gallup's Q12, but employees have experiences from the time we start recruiting them, actually before, right through to when they leave our organization. And there's so many touch points in between, and what we do with those employees through their life cycle can make a big difference in terms of do they want to do their best work or not. And I'm a big proponent of the last one, develop your leaders. You know what we typically do in organizations, and I'll see if this rings true for any of you. We take our best workers, our best technical people, and we look at them one day, it happened to me when I was at KPMG, we tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you're really good at what you do. You do the work really well. How'd you like to be a leader? Does that sound familiar to anybody? And unfortunately, well-intentioned people who could be very good leaders often go into the job unprepared. They don't know how to do it. They've been rewarded for their technical skills. And so we need to support our leaders and help them get the knowledge, skills, and tools they need to be successful. I don't know about you, but when I was first promoted into management, I remember, my boss tapped me on the shoulder, hey, Claudia, how'd you like to be a manager? Not being very smart, I said, sure. How hard can that be? And I remember, I worked with the same group of people. I sat at the same desk. I came in one morning and my business cards had changed. Claudia Verberg, manager. And I thought, I'm in trouble. I didn't get any smarter overnight. How am I going to do this? So I think a lot of leaders have that experience. So we need to set them up for success. So just talking a little bit about building a business case, if you haven't already done that. How many of you are in HR? Okay. So one of the things we need to get good at, especially if we're in HR, I'm really passionate about this, we need to learn how to talk the language of the business. So, we can't say, oh, people will feel better. We need to talk about, we are producing widgets, and if we get this right, how our error rate, I'm losing the term, but when things don't go right, our quality defects, we're at 25%. We need to lower that. We're going to make all kinds of money, and the secret is our people are not paying enough attention because they're paying attention to other things going on in the work environment. So if we fix this, we're going to get better results. So you need to learn how to talk the language of your business if you don't already. You need to track metrics, and by that I mean things like turnover, absenteeism, healthcare costs, training, recruitment, loss, safety instances, grievances, what's happening in those. Make sure you know where you're at. You want to benchmark. So how are we doing compared to comparative organizations, compared to others in our industry? So see if you can, if we're at 25% engagement in an industry where the engagement is typically 5%, we're doing pretty good. Doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement, but you need to figure out where you stand comparatively. You need to build a business case. You need to talk about things like return on investments, cost-benefit analysis. Again, we need to make a business case. Do we have any executive directors or CEOs in the room? Is this music to your ears, somebody bringing you this kind of information? Actually having solid business information to make decisions? And you got to get senior management buy-in. It starts at the top. You want to change your organization? You want to do better? The top person sets the tone. And engagement is actually delivered. What matters is the relationship the person has with their direct supervisor, their direct boss. But the tone is set from the top. So you've got to figure out, remember Jerry Maguire, show me the money? You need to learn how to do a bit of this. So I'm just going to go through the employee life cycle and give you some food for thought. Remember when I said, we touch on experiences. So you've developed a business case, you need to do something about engagement. So how can you look at this? So you need to look at sort of the major components of what we go through with employees in their lives. Recruitment and selection, how do you hire people? And I'm just going to fast forward. Hire right in the first place. You know, I have helped organizations with recruitment, and I've had clients say, well, you know, we got 3 candidates, none of them is great, but we have to hire one of these. And I'm like, really? Why? If you don't have the right person in the first place, why are you hiring second best or third best? This is hard, right? Because I'm suggesting to you, you might have to leave a position vacant. There was a case in Calgary that I heard about during the oil boom, position in Fort McMurray. They were trying desperately to find some kind of management position, someone for a management position. They had a candidate who had been terminated twice for poor management, and they hired him anyway, because they said it's better to have a body than to have no one. That scares me. So, you know, questions to ask yourself, are we hiring right? Like, do we know what we're hiring against? Do we have job criteria? Are we asking the right questions in the interview? Are we doing reference checks? How do we treat people? How many of you communicate with all candidates, say, thank you for submitting your resume. We got it. You're making an impression. How you treat people, even if they aren't successful, sets a tone. I want you to think about that. When you're turning down a candidate, have the courtesy to have a conversation with them and say, I want to let you know you weren't successful, and here's why. We had another candidate who had this, and we saw you having this. So think about what you're doing when you're hiring people. Another piece of the puzzle, how do you orient your people? Here's been my experience. We hire a person, we sit them at their desk or at their workstation or send them out to their work. We have an initial conversation. Here's your job descriptions, here's your expectations. Have at her. And we leave them alone, more or less. So they talk to their colleagues, trying to figure things out. Has that ever happened to anyone here? So what happens is within about 6 months, by the way, the person they're talking to is your actively disengaged person. You joined this company, it sucks, you know? So in 6 months' time, you have someone who came in enthusiastic and excited to be with you. They are disillusioned, disenfranchised, disengaged. And if they're smart, they're looking for their next job, and if not, they may stay but mentally quit. And I'm not saying overall. So what do you do to orient people? Do you have buddy system? Do you stay in touch with them? Do you have regular meetings with them? All of those kinds of things. Do you tell them about your company, what your culture, your values are, your vision? Performance, manage that performance. Give feedback. Feedback is a powerful gift. Let people know how they're doing more than once a year. People hate performance reviews because of surprises. There shouldn't be any surprises in a performance review. It should be a review of this is what you're doing well. This is areas we've talked about where you can develop. Here's how you've been doing. Now let's talk about the future. That's the reason for the performance meeting. You want to think about their growth and development. So where can they go? How are we going to get them to get new experiences? Do they have career plans? How do we make succession decisions? You know, how do we figure out who's going to move to the next level? How do we select our next leaders? All of that comes into place. And then separation. How do we say goodbye? I have been with organizations where the minute somebody gives their notice, they're like pariah. The boss stops talking to them. And sometimes their colleagues do too. So, you know, show some enthusiasm, offer to keep in touch, and do keep in touch. Somebody may leave, get a piece of experience, and come back even more valuable. You know, the door, and I've had some organizations where they say, oh, we never rehire a past employee. Really? What a lost opportunity. Because they may have said, hey, I thought it was better over there. It's not, it's better over here. And I'm now more committed to you than I ever was. So food for thought. So I'm going to give you a chance for one last conversation. But I want you to, we just talked about the employee life cycle. I'll put it back up in a moment. But I want you to personalize this as much as you can. So what can you do in your organization around the employee's experience throughout their life cycle with you to keep them engaged? So I'll just put that back up, okay? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for that conversation. So what we'd like to do, I just want to stop by every table, and if you can just share, sort of one nugget that you talked about that might be helpful to other people in the room. So just kind of without, you don't have to share your trade secrets or anything, but just a little bit of, when you thought about the employee life cycle, what kinds of things can you do? So perhaps we could start over here, and we've got a mic so we can hear you.
We talked about performance a lot. I think all of us have struggles with actually getting the performance check-ins and all of that done because our managers feel like they don't have time. So finding the time and coming up with some better concepts to take it less disciplinary, being just more like check-ins, focus on future goals, to keep them kind of engaged throughout their employee life cycle.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Yeah, one of the things, that I've seen successful organizations do is even a 15-minute check-in with all of their people once a week. So how's it going this week? What's happening? What went well? What didn't go so well? What can we do differently? How can I support you in that? It's amazing how quickly you can do that. Okay, we'll go over here.
So I used to work in construction, so we have large amounts of recruitment that occurs and large amounts of new employees that flood our workplaces on a weekly basis, say the very least. So we'd always give them kind of like the regular onboarding, the regular orientation, but then so I'm silly, but I put a sticker on their hard hats they would have to wear for 3 months, and then I would assign them to, I guess, a peer tutor or somebody who is their question person so they could confide in them. That person could feed back to me as well how they were doing.
Yeah, you bet. A buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Thank you.
Hi. For the new hires, having a 30, 60, 90-day follow-up where the HR goes and talks to them, because being a new hire, they wouldn't feel comfortable to voice their concerns or anything like that. So if we touch base with them and see how things are going and pairing up them with a mentor or somebody and maybe make improvements or suggestions based on that.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, don't abandon them.
Something to that, if you don't mind.
One of the things that we do is when you're hiring new staff, they don't know the dynamics of the office. So they don't know the lunch times. They don't know the break times. They don't know where to park. They don't know, do they bring lunch? Do we go out for lunch? They don't know any of those dynamics. So once they're hired, I send them out a memo or a note to saying, and I've said, here's what happened. So you know what? The first day they know where to park. The first day they know what door to use. They know where to come in. And I've gotten more positive feedback from the new employees from that, saying, thank you for doing that. They felt like part of the group immediately because of those little steps I sent out ahead of time. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Just add that in.
It shows you care about them.
Yeah.
You're not just a number, you're a person. Yeah.
Surprise, huh?
So, yeah, I got surprised here a little bit, right? So we discussed a little bit of what that would look like for us, and so some of the things that we talked about was we could really be good at recruiting and selection and orientation onboarding, but when it comes to performance and growth development, we're thinking of our partners that we're closely working with. And we might be supportive of the performance, we might be supportive of the growth and development. There are demands from the consumer side, and trying to see how we can balance as well. So performance may not be supported in the environment that we put them in, but we could be supportive. So trying to see how we can actually address that in the environment that they're working. So those were the discussions that we had at our table.
Right. So they're working inside a customer.
Yes.
And so you can't control what happens to them there.
Exactly.
But it's what do you do when they're with you?
Exactly, right? We could be supportive, but there are demands from the consumer's perspective as well. So trying to see how we can balance, how we continue to support that within that environment, and really looking at how dynamic those situations are.
Right, yeah,
So
great.
these were the discussions that we
Yeah,
had.
thank you. Yeah, don't abandon them.
Yes.
Okay, couple more tables. I know you're all fighting for this mic.
One of the areas that I struggle with is the growth and development. Someone has a very good performance, they're a great employee, and then you promote them, and then you develop them, and grow them, and invest in them, and then they're just cursed with a position that they don't want because they didn't want to be a manager. They wanted a promotion, they appreciated the recognition, but then they get there and they're like, yeah, no, this isn't for me. Management is not for me. And then you've lost them. They're disengaged again.
Yeah.
And you've lost them where they were good. So I think sometimes promoting employees is a curse to them and the organization.
You bet. If you can, some organizations have dual career tracks. So you can either become a leader if that's what you really love to do, or you can move into more of a technical specialist role. Like, not all organizations have that opportunity. But think about, don't define growth as promotion, and and reward as promotion, because it might be, you're really great, would you like to sit on this committee? Or how would you like to be cross-trained for that other role? Or how would you like to try this for a while? And, to give other definitions and to make it okay, and I've seen organizations do this very successfully, make it okay for someone to say, this isn't for me, can I go back to my old job? Absolutely, no shame, no loss, we will make that change. We will keep you here. Not always easy, but if you can. Okay, how about this table?
I think at this table we have actually a good representation of the sizes of organization and what happens when, for example, you're looking at the employee life cycle in the big size organization, 100 and up number of employees, and then mid-size, 50 and under, and small size. So I think one of the examples shared at the table here is with the large size organization is the issue of orientation, where HR is not necessarily quite involved in a sense in the onboarding and orientation, for example, in specific positions. They do the initial orientation, but also recognizing that the HR can play a role by just making people welcome in the organization. And then the experience of mid-sized and small organizations where people really do multiple jobs. So for example, you're the HR person, you're the program manager, you're kind of overseeing multiple things. We need to figure out where we draw balances and draw support from the team in a sense where the growth and development becomes really critical, because then you have to really look within your team to see who has what skills that you can actually make them become part of the process in the program that gives opportunity for the leadership of the program to be able to actually deal with the HR in the best way possible. So you're recognizing people, you're not necessarily having the ability to promote people because that opportunity in some cases is not possible, but recognizing people's skills and giving them roles that acknowledges that. So those are some of the things that we kind of talked about here.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Yeah, so different roles depending on where we are, but we can all welcome people to the organization. Okay, go ahead. One more.
We talked about struggling with growth and development in our organization because we have the program that we have the greatest turnover in is really an entry-level position. And so people come into that program, and then there's very little movement for them to advance into a supervisory role because our supervisors never leave. So we talked about how we could engage those employees and help them with their growth and development and sort of change their way of thinking that growth and development isn't based upon your level within the organization, but giving them things like stretch assignments or additional training, some shared responsibility, just to, I guess, enhance that growth and development without them having to go somewhere else to get that.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're trying to focus on.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So hopefully you've got some good tips. So, you know, the point really is there's so many touch points we have with people throughout their careers with us. If we are handling them respectfully, one of the things I've done in the past, I was an outplacement consultant for a while. So I actually met with people who were terminated, and I helped them move forward in their careers. And I have had some people say, thank goodness they terminated me. I was miserable. I wasn't accepting that I was miserable. I'm so much happier, and I found the right job now. So, you know, no matter the circumstances, keep that in mind. So just some final thoughts for you. I mentioned this before. People don't leave organizations, they leave leaders. So do what you can to support your leaders. So what are some of the things? You got to select your leaders for the right reasons. Do you want to get work done through others? If not, you probably won't be as successful as a leader. Do you actually care about people? You know, what is the wrong reason to promote someone for a leader? Into a leadership position? I want more money and more power. Those are dangerous people. So promote for the right reasons, select for the right reasons. You know, one lady, you were talking about construction. Some people just gravitate to have influence over their colleagues. And you'll notice that. You know, maybe going to those people and say, hey, you're already influencing, how about we give you the title? You know, you're selecting them for the right reasons, the skills that they are showing in people leadership. You need to arm them. And you know, I'm involved in a variety of programs, including one with Mount Royal University, where people are often being trained to be leaders before they ever accept their first leadership position. So it's like, hey, here's how you delegate. Here's how you give feedback. So they get to go through it, they get to practice the skills and learn the knowledge. And as an added bonus, they get to see what does a manager actually do. So then they can make a wise decision on, do I want to do that if the opportunity arises or not? You have to hold them accountable for being good people leaders. I have seen people leave in droves because of their manager. And the organization keeps saying the same thing, but they get things done. Yeah, they're, you know, it's sort of short-term gain, long-term pain. So I would challenge you to think about how you can develop your leaders. So think about, you know, like training is great for basic knowledge building and maybe some skill building. Have coaches and mentors available. Buddy them up with people who are really good at this. Give them stretch assignments, special projects where they get to try some things out. So get creative about how you can develop people to be great people leaders. And I just want to leave you this one thought. The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. So aim high, aim for high engagement. And I wish you great success in your journey. Thank you.